This podcast is sponsored by Xgrowth. Xgrowth is the APAC ABM agency. If you and your organization are looking to land and expand enterprise mid-market deals, Xgrowth is the agency to help. Xgrowth works with a wide range of international and global technology vendors, service providers, and B2B SaaS companies. If this sounds like something you're interested to know more about, make sure to check out Xgrowth at xgrowth.com.au. That's xgrowth.com.au and chat with the APAC ABM agency.
What's up, marketers, and welcome to another episode of the Growth Colony podcast. I'm Liza from Xgrowth to tell you that each episode we bring in B2B leaders to chat about how you can achieve those everyday wins in the marketing world. Whether you're new to the B2B game, working at a leadership level, or even just showing some interest, we know you'll love the episode. So grab a drink, get comfy, and enjoy the show.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode. I'm Shane Hoda with Xgrowth and today I'm talking to Nirosha Methananda, VP of Marketing at Inflow2, about how she, in her previous role at Bombora, grew the marketing function from only one person to a full team of 20 people, and now she's doing it at Inflow2. For those of you who don't know Bombora, the company is a poster child in the marketing technology space, and that experience of growing at Bombora's marketing team would have been an amazing one. So you make sure you dial in and listen very carefully to this. I'm super excited for this. Nirosha, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Shane. I appreciate you having me, and thank you for that very, very kind compliment. I've never had one of my experiences described as a poster child.
Well, it is. I mean, Bombora. To be honest with you, I can't say who, but people from the industry, that companies that have been in the especially intent space where Bombora is, have described Bombora as this. They've a lot of good things that have said by Bombora's competitors about Bombora. So it's awesome to hear about Bombora's growth and Bombora's marketing. That's definitely one of the reasons I'm super excited for our chat today. First of all, can you give us a picture of the marketing function at Bombora? I mean, I did mention that it was a one-person band and you grew it to 20 people or so before joining Inflow2. But can you give us a little bit of a picture from marketing perspective from start to finish, really high level, and we dive deeper into the details?
Yeah, sure. So, I came on board with Bombora as their director of marketing, and, I was their first full-time hire, and they had an intern who was a graphic design intern, so we turned her into a full-time intern. And then the way that I actually came to Bombora, it was through someone named Mark Johnson, and he had been the CMO at a company I'd worked with in Australia called Hitwise. So he was the CMO at Experian, who acquired Hitwise, and I'd worked together with him. So he was advising Bombora at the time, and then he later came on as the CMO. So he was in a dual role of a CMO and the GM as well. And so between us, I was employee number 20 there. There was a lot to set up with Bombora from a GM perspective. So a lot of Mark's initial years, and also a lot of marketing's initial years were spent not only marketing, but also, setting up Bombora from an operational perspective.
Gotta wear a lot of hats in the startup world.
Yeah. I mean, that's part and parcel of the experience. So from there, we sort of grew out our product marketing. So, we really focused on a lot of brand stuff. We're doing a number of building out a lot of our content, building out a lot of our brand. Then the product got more formalized. So we formalized the product marketing function. From there, looked at building out our events and brought on our events capability. And then looked at our marketing ops and analysis and reporting and things like that. So we got a marketing ops analysis, essentially. And then the business had a little bit of a pivot in terms of, what the strategy was from a go-to-market perspective. So, it was initially when I joined Bombora, the company was really focused more on enterprise and that segment of the market. And then we looked at building out a growth and SMB function. And so, we had a demand. I'd been, we had a light demand function of what I would say, but with growth came the need for a formalized demand function. And so we grew that out. And with that came campaign managers. We also formalized revenue ops because our sales team had also grown. And so needing to have those functions, that grew out as well. And then under product marketing grew customer marketing, grew sales enablement, from that perspective, and that's really what the team looked like when I sort of exited and went to Influ 2. Actually, and I skipped one. We also had channel marketing, which was a new function that I was sort of leading out towards my latter years in Bombora. So yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So it's interesting to hear. It sounds like you started with product marketing, went into field, markup started to develop further, and brought in demand gen and channel, and then towards the end it was like rev ops was the area that you focused on. What were some of those first actions that you took as the first marketing hire?
Yeah, so really I looked at strategy. At building a strategy for Bombora. And so the way that I went about doing that was I went through and interviewed basically the entire leadership team to get an understanding of where they saw Bombora and what they saw the priorities as being. What we also did was we did a number of different workshops to understand who our buyers were, what their personas were, and so on and so forth. And so from there, I pulled together a strategy, and really the core of what that strategy was around was building the foundations. So, the foundations being Salesforce, which was being used, but really a mess. Frankly, it was about the brand and really building up that brand around what the brand was and what we looked like, and then the content around what we, what are we saying in market? How are we describing the product? How are we going after different things? Because everything was sort of not necessary. Things were there, but they weren't necessarily organized in a way. So a lot of it was about building up those key foundations to be able to build our marketing on top of, and also a lot of process and organization around what that looked like. So that was really the key to how we sort of grew out over the next couple of years. It was I don't know how many page strategy, but it went through very clearly, each area, what we needed to do in the immediate, short, long term, and be able to grow from there. And I'll say actually, like, that strategy probably, if we go back to it today, we still didn't do some things that were on the strategy. So it was a pretty broad strategy, but that's what it was about. It was really building out those foundations. And particularly, I think, when you talk about Bombora as being a poster child, I think there's an underestimation of how much building out the brand and having that cohesiveness around it had an impact on Bombora and how we went to market and how people perceived us in market as well from that perspective.
Yeah, it's very clear. I mean, Bombora has this like funky, hip kind of sense to it, right? And I know the name comes from Australia. It comes from the surfing world. Does it come from Victoria? Like, is it a place down in Torquay, is it?
That I don't know. It's actually so Bombora is actually an Australian Aboriginal word, and it's a word used to describe like a wave breaking over a shallow reef. So it's actually like it's kind of dangerous. But the etymology of it for the business is, the CEO of Bombora, Eric, he is a big surfer. Mark is a big surfer. We have a lot of people within the organization. I mean, my favorite place to be is on the beach. So we have a lot of people within the organization who are very connected to that. And that's where that name, resounded from. And that's really what we built the brand, we built the brand around. And if you look at the evolution of how that brand, came together, and you're right, it was funky. It was something different. And that was part of what I loved about that journey, because, we started with surf and waves and this and that, but it was taking it into that context and trying not to take it too far. I'm not saying sometimes that didn't necessarily work for us and we had to pull ourselves back, but it was taking, and evolving that. And that really, what it did was it pulled through some of the human of, who our team was, what we were invested in, what we enjoyed, and really brought that into the business. And we tied it back. We tied it back to what the product was, how the product worked, and made those connections. So it wasn't like, oh yeah, this is just a brand that looks like kind of a surfy brand or whatever it is. We really did try and make those connections back. And it really was pervasive through the culture of what Bombora built as well, in terms of, being sustainable, Bombora is affiliated with a company or with a not-for-profit called Surfrider, and they do beach cleanups, and they're really invested in the ecology around the ocean. And so that's what the teams used to do, go and do the beach cleanups and, participate from that perspective. And so I guess that from a brand perspective was one of the things that I think really helped propel Bombora from that perspective.
I love it. Let's talk about the team again.
Mm-hmm.
Now you mentioned that one of the early areas that you started hiring was product marketing, right?
Yep.
But was that the first hire was the intern that went from part-time to full-time?
Yes.
What was the second role that you hired for?
Well, I didn't hire. So our CMO came on board. So he was the second hire essentially.
Right.
But So it was for about 9 months at Bombora. It was just the three of us, working together, and yeah.
What was the hire afterwards?
Product marketing.
So it meant, okay, product marketing was just
the
core focus for interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And why was that? Why go down the product marketing route?
Yeah, there was a need for it in the business. The product evolved, and it evolved into where we created our own interface. And that's essentially where Bombora, how people access the Bombora data and they orchestrate it. So, that was a big change in terms of from a go-to-market perspective, and that became important because with when you start to have an actual product, you need all the information that goes around it. You need to be able to articulate, not only for prospects but also for your customers. Well, how does this work? And it also changed the way we needed to go to market from that perspective. And having that specialized role really helped solidify it. And I think you can see it now. I've seen a lot of businesses coming back to that product-led growth. And at the moment, product marketers are worth their weight in gold. And it is, because if you can't articulate what you sell and what your product is, and if your customers can't use it, good luck to you. Especially nowadays, because what's the point? That if you can do a great, initial marketing job from a demand perspective, you can have a great sales, but if your customers can't use your product and it just sits there on the shelf unused, they will cut it. Undoubtedly now, especially now that we're going into this down market. So that's why it was important at that stage as well to be able to, we were accelerating from a product development perspective, and it was really apparent that we needed that function.
Nirosha, I want to talk about mistakes.
Okay.
What were some of the mistakes you made or the team made, you think, at Bombora growing the marketing function, driving demand? What comes to mind?
I mean, I think, when you go down that hiring path and structure path of how a team works, you can inadvertently silo different parts of the team. And I think, with events, for example, initially events reported directly to our CMO, and then the reporting line was changed to come under me. Like with demand, we hired a specialist to really pull, to build out that demand program. I think, from my perspective, I think we would have been better having that cohesion. And it's not that we didn't get there, we did from a team perspective, but I think, structurally thinking about how things work and being mindful around growth and development and career paths and so on and so forth is super important, because, you want to value who you have in the team, and you also want to make sure that whoever you're hiring is coming in and they're one set up for success, and they're also working cohesively, because otherwise, you often you'll have, I'm not, and at some points this did happen with us, you'll have people that are sort of going off in one direction, and then you don't there's no visibility of what's happening, and then two teams are essentially doing the same thing. I will say, even, it's an experience that I have at Influ too as well, where you have these structures that don't necessarily set up teams for success. And I think that's a mistake, and I don't think businesses, and I think certainly with Bombora, I think we probably, had we done things a little bit differently, there may have been different outcomes from that perspective. But that's something that does come to mind from that perspective.
And yeah. Sorry, did you want to mention something else?
No, I was going to, I'll keep going with our mistakes. One other, I think, we had a limited budget, obviously, as a startup, and we made a very conscious decision from an events perspective to not sponsor events. So we'd have our team on the ground and they would be there. And then we, from a booth perspective or a branding perspective, we wouldn't necessarily be there in the early days. And while I think, we did what we could, I think I probably would have invested a little bit more into being at maybe one or two flagship events from a sponsorship perspective, because, I think I think it is important in terms of having that visibility, being on the ground, albeit we were in different times when I first started at Bombora. We weren't in COVID times, and everyone wasn't starving for events, so we could travel around and meet people. But still, I think that was something that, in hindsight, had we done that earlier, it probably would have served us well.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. What would be your advice if somebody's trying to do this? If somebody is in a startup, they're one of the few people in the marketing team recently maybe hired, and they're trying to grow that marketing function, what would you tell them? What advice would you have for them?
Understand what the business needs are, understand what the business strategy and the business goals are, understand what the executives' expectations are in terms of what marketing is supposed to deliver, and really build, not just that, and if you, depending on what the business is, if you're selling a product, understand what the product is, understand what your customers' feedback is and needs are, and then take that and look at what you build and prioritize what you need to do. One other thing that I will say is super duper duper important, especially right now, is make sure that you are, one, tracking and attributing what your value is, and two, articulating it. So, one thing that I was chatting with someone I know. He's another Australian at an agency here in the US. One of the things I think from my perspective, from being, having grown up in Australia, I'm not usually in the habit of being like, oh, I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. I'm doing whatever it is. I'm kind of one of those people that it's like, all right, cool. I need to get on with it. I've done that now. Next. And I just sort of put my head down, bum up, and keep going. And I don't necessarily stop to tell people, oh, I've done this. You have this now, blah, blah, blah. And that's a shortcoming. And I think, it's an important thing for someone who's coming into this role or coming into, being that first marketing hire to be able to articulate what you're doing and the value of it, because, you need that. You need advocacy and you need investment into your function and for yourself as well. And I think investing in your own advocacy always goes a long way from that perspective. Another thing I would say is, make sure you build out your community, make sure you have a network. And because, especially for me, I've been in businesses that are essentially I'm marketing to marketers and I'm a marketer. And having my network and my connections for the products the business I've worked for, I've sold, has really helped, because when I have that, what my CEO says, I'm part of that tribe. And it's true, because when you're a marketer, you know what marketing is like. When you're being marketed to, you know what sales is like. So it makes a difference coming from a marketer, and being able to have that empathy in those conversations and those networks is super important.
I love it. How, Nirosha, how did you go about building your network, especially, going to a new country? But what do you have any advice for people building that tribe and network?
Yeah, it was an interesting thing, because when I first went to the US, I didn't really know anyone. I knew Mark because I'd worked with him previously. And I didn't at the time actually know that he was coming into the business, but it was a blessing in disguise from that perspective. But, I had, for the first sort of 3 years at Bombora, I really was very focused internally, building. And I looked up and I realized, I don't really know anyone outside of Bombora. And so, what I would do is I'd start going to events, getting to know people. I was doing more in market around talking to our customers, doing our case studies, working on webinars and things like that. And just being able to build out my network from that, that really helped. I will say, the industry events and networking at those really has helped me. And I think it's hard to do things, I think, on your own. I've had a couple of team members that have come from intern up, but you just, you have to sort of push yourself out of that comfort zone and go and introduce yourself, go and find out and have those conversations with people. And I think that's what actually, really helps to make a difference. But you'll find people are pretty open in terms of, I think there's this internal fear where they're going to think I'm stupid, or they're going to, they're going to not want to talk to me, or whatever it is. Okay. And if they
so what? Move past that.
Yeah.
Before Nirosha, before we go into rapid fire questions, yeah. I also want to get a little bit of an idea, especially because marketers listen to this, and it's always interesting to hear what some of the new technology providers are there. Can you tell us a little bit about Inflow2 as well?
Sure. Yeah. So for those who don't know, Inflow2 is a person-based advertising solution. So what that means is essentially what it says. You can take people at an account that you want to target and push them through Inflow2. So Inflow2 runs display and social media advertising. So it runs through the Meta properties, so Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Yahoo Display, Google Display, and Amazon. And it runs those campaigns across those platforms, and essentially targets those specific individuals that you want to reach. What it does is it actually has a way to identify who those individuals are and what their engagement has been with those ads. So it brings back that data at a person-based level. And obviously, if someone clicks on one ad, they're going to definitely buy from you. That's not, I'm being facetious there. So we aggregate that information up. So at a person-based level, you can understand, and there's a score that gets attributed to them in terms of their engagement with your ads through Influ2. We aggregate that up again at an account level, and then, at a buying group level, and then at an account level as well. So you have like a couple of different layers. So essentially, Influ2 is used by B2B marketers and sales teams to be able to make use of advertising. And the reason I joined Influ2 is, as a marketer, and I know this is like going to be sacrilege, but, I think advertising is such a big, it's such a big black hole of a lot of money. And that's one thing. And I was kind of like, cool, you actually can take your 100 grand and understand who you're going to be reaching.
Exactly is seeing, yeah.
Yeah, that's immediate value, because I can go back to the CEO and say, hey, actually, this is what that program did, and this is the value it's delivering and the impact it's having. 1. 2, sales teams always kind of want to know who is engaging. And this was one of the things that I picked up with Bombora. So Bombora's intent data is at an account level. So it's great to understand, okay, this account is interested in this. But then what sales essentially says is, okay, cool, I know they're interested. Who? And this, if you use the two together, actually, the account, and then you know the who, and it takes you full circle. And I was like, cool, this actually makes, gives sales the insights that that they're looking for, makes advertising useful. So that's in a nutshell what Influ2 is and does.
I love it. I love it how hyper-personalized things are going.
Have you read the State of ABM and APAC report yet? If you have, you'll know that 59% of marketing leaders are intending to increase their ABM investment in the coming year. Even bigger news is 0% of survey respondents are going to decrease their investment. It's an exciting time for ABM in the region. Discover the state of account-based marketing in APAC today. Download the full report at abm.xgrowth.com.au/report. That's abm.xgrowth.com.au/report.
Okay, let's do some rapid fire questions.
Cool.
First question I got is, what is one resource? It could be a book, a blog, a podcast, a conversation, a person that has fundamentally changed the way you work or live.
Yeah, so it's an experience. Before I came to the US, I was with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I was on a leave of absence. So I'd come to the US, as a part of a big trip that I'd done. And I was in Washington with a cousin of mine, and she took me to it was like an Indian cinema kind of festival. And we watched a movie, and then they had a sit down with the director and the writer and one of the actors. And the reason that changed me was one thing was the writer was talking about how they had written the story for this movie, and what it impressed upon me was that how experiences and writings can be translated and can make an impact. And that was one thing. The other thing was it just excited me about coming to the US, and from there that's where that seed started to grow in terms of, oh wow, like that's cool, there's these opportunities here, and that's where I want to be. So that's where that seed really started to grow. So it was, yeah, that was the one experience that's fundamentally changed my career and my life essentially.
And moving to new countries, it's just it is quite something. So I've definitely done it multiple times in my life, and every single time it's just makes you grow as a person.
Yeah.
Question number 2: if you could give one advice to B2B marketers, what would it be?
Advocate for yourself. Advocate for yourself, and make sure you make time for yourself. And whether that's to do your own thing, whether it's to build your own brand, whether it's, whatever it is, make sure you, because I think marketing can be quite consuming. It's definitely, I always say it's like it can be one of the most thankless jobs, because if you're doing it right, no one knows. And if you're doing it wrong, they will tell you. And also everyone thinks that they can do it. So
Yes.
make sure that you're advocating for yourself and you're taking time and making time for yourself. That's the one thing I tell them.
That's a great point. Question 3 is, who are some of the influencers that you follow?
So I really like someone named Bob Hoffman. So he is an advertising pundit here in the US. He has a newsletter that he sends out on every Sunday, and it's one of that's one of the few things that I read like without fail. I'm a snarky person. I love sarcasm, and he is so snarky.
He has plenty of it. Plenty of it.
Yeah.
I'm saying he has plenty of it to dishing out.
Oh yeah. He definitely does. And I just but he also breaks down information from ad tech in a really easy to understand way. And it's just no holds barred, and I really appreciate that. So he's someone I follow. Katie Martell, she's been in the B2B marketing scene in Boston for quite some time. And she is an unapologetic truth teller. And I just, I've known Katie for a while, and I love following her stuff and her style, and just seeing her growth. So she's someone else that I've followed as well. So yeah, I think those are the two that really stand out for me, for now.
Great recommendations. And last question I have is, what is something that excites you about B2B today?
I think it's the coming together of B2B and B2C. And so what I mean by that is, B2B is sort of viewed as being like, oh, it's conservative, or it can be boring, and I just I never thought that was the case. It's what I've made my career from, and I have always loved it. But what I think is in the execution of B2B, it's becoming, as you said, it's becoming more personal, it's becoming more human, and you have to be. And so that's what I think that's exciting. It's exciting to see personality. It's exciting to see, the human come through in terms of, like, if you look at LinkedIn now, it's not just like promotion of brand and product and so on and so forth. You start to see some of these human stories come through. You start to see the layers of who people are, and you start to see what their interests are. And I think that's really powerful from a B2B perspective. I think it needs to be leveraged in the right way. But I think if you can leverage that very well, that's going to be super exciting to see how that sort of evolves and comes together. So that's something I'm really excited about.
Nirosha, this has been an awesome conversation.
Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for all your insights and all the information that you shared. It was great having a chat.
Yeah, super appreciated. And I thank you for inviting me and giving me the time.
It's a pleasure.
Today's episode of Growth Colony was produced by Alexander Hipwell and Liza Maywald. It was edited by Dave Samito, with additional editing by Liza Maywald and music arrangement by Alexander and Liza. Special thanks to Tina Wabe. We couldn't make the show without you. Growth Colony is hosted by Shaheen Hoda, Director of Growth at Xgrowth. If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Do you think you'd be a great guest, or just keen for a chat? Send through an email at podcast@xgrowth.com.au. That's podcast@xgrowth.com.au. That's all for now. We'll catch you next week, right here on Growth Colony.